Welcome to another episode of the Incident Commander series. On this episode, we're going to explore the role of an incident commander with another incident commander, Timothy Cohen. Timothy currently works as a senior manager, security incident command at ServiceNow. Timothy has done a lot of work in the knowledge sharing around the incident commander role in the past, so I'm really pleased to have him on the show today and to hear his experiences as an incident commander. So welcome, Timothy, to the show, and without further ado, let's get started. How do you see the incident commander role?
I think the traditional view of incident commander is that someone wears that hat for a certain period of time, right? They put on the incident commander hat, they'll deal with it, and then they'll go back to their role as maybe leading the SOC or doing something else, depending on the size of your organization. The different approach that we've taken at ServiceNow and our GVP of enterprise security brought this model from Uber was to say, no, at an organization at a certain maturity level and size, we're, between 25 to 30,000 people, you need to have a dedicated security incident command team, 24/7 in multiple regions. So we actually have 3 different regions: India, EMEA, based out of Dublin, and then the United States. We have multiple commanders per region, and we do rotations with on-calls over the weekend, and they're passing off incidents to each other. So we don't have one incident commander just taking over and working nonstop for days on end, no sleep. We have clear shift handovers between commanders. So each commander, there's no context lost between one commander who works 7 days straight and then collapses and someone has to fill in. There's context is constantly being transferred between. And that creates challenges, of course, because handovers have to be done very thoroughly. You have to make sure that there's worm handovers when you're dealing with an active incident, bridges and handing over the bridges. So it does add complexity, but by having a dedicated team that we are focused on only this and handling only those major security incidents, we can craft all of the process around it to make sure that that context is being transferred and there's no drop off between commanders, so that we have that same level of response for those people on the response teams, no matter what region we're in, and we're being able to transfer that between them. The other unique thing that we have as well is we also have support personnel, if you want to look at it. I have somebody on my team, which is a PIR specialist. So their job is only to handle the post-mortems and the post-incident reviews after an incident. So a lot of times the commander would have to do that after they're done. They have to go through that. They have to do all that paperwork, send out whatever way you're tracking those remediation items for the longer term to make sure we're getting those lessons learned. I have a specialist who only handles that, as well as somebody dedicated to communications. So they will help with, drafting communications and doing all those things, because those are the things that tend to take a lot of the time away from commanders in those 2 aspects. And by having specialists do that with unique skill sets, it also helps make it more conducive.
How do you run the incident commander program in your organization?
My command team has been around for 3 years. We have had the senior commanders have all been here. They are hired specific into the commander role. What I've done since I've become manager is that I've also created a pipeline, in the sense that we have several commanders that are lower level, in the sense that they're not senior commanders, so they can grow into that role. Often they will come from a triage SOC, entry level SOC experience, so that they have that baseline knowledge and understanding. But incident command is such a unique thing that it's very hard to have somebody who can jump into it and then jump out of it. Especially at a very large company that's constantly dealing with various things. You need somebody dedicated to that craft, dedicated to the work that's being done there. So what I have done is basically I've created a career leveling for incident commander as a role. So you can start from an IC2 position, right? You have to have a certain level of experience, but then you can grow all the way up to an individual contributor 5 or 6.
How do you see the future of the incident commander role?
I see the future of the incident commander role as a role in itself. I think we've mentioned it a couple of times on the podcast that people do this for short periods of time. They do it for maybe once in a while they have that hat. I think this is a emerging role in cybersecurity that is going to be imperative. The complex problems that we are facing, from threat actors, APTs, nation states in the sense from a like global cyber warfare perspective, right? With the conflicts we're seeing around the world, cybersecurity incident commanders are a critical role, and it needs to be a discipline in and of itself, right? It's unique in the sense that it's not a linear path to becoming a good incident commander. You need to be able to have certain skill sets that I don't think traditionally people are thinking about in cybersecurity. I like to call it cybersecurity crisis management because the skill sets are a crisis manager skill set in a cybersecurity context. So I think that this is imperative because the complex choices that we're facing, the prioritization, the types of attacks, all of these things are just showing you that the complexity and sophistication is continuing to grow. And as things are more complex and sophisticated, they are more resource demanding. They are more functional teams that need to be involved, and that growth in cybersecurity means you need somebody at the top coordinating all of that together, making sure that they're all in tune. And so that as that expands, you need that person being very good at that job. And I think in the past, it's been very much someone could do that once in a while. Now I think people need to be trained on this. We're seeing some trainings come up for incident commander type roles. There's some trainings that have come out from various different GIAC and different things like that that are more focused on this, that I think continue to need to happen because it's a skill set that needs to grow. It's a discipline that needs to grow. And people need to be dedicated to this function because it is something, if you want to be at the top of your game, you need to be doing this every day. I'm not saying that every organization is going to have major security incidents every day. They shouldn't, hopefully. But there's more to it, right? We talked about the PIR process, the tabletop exercises, right? That's a part of my function as our security incident. We run all of our tabletop exercise cybersecurity for compliance and for our own readiness and preparedness. That's a huge aspect of it, right? We think of it as three pillars: prepare, respond, recover. The respond is only one pillar. You need to prepare, right, with tabletop exercises, playbooks, all these things, and you need to recover, lessons learned, making sure that we're tracking those remediations, that we're making sure that the owners are fixing those things that we identified. So if you look at that command as that holistic model, that crisis management model, it is something that can be a real true discipline for people to be in because it encompasses those three things that are going to be critical, that can sustain somebody being full-time or multiple people being full-time in this position, depending on the size of your organization.
What skills does an incident commander need to have from your perspective?
That's a really good question. It's one I've been thinking about a lot, actually, because as I'm creating this leveling guide, I have to set up capabilities, right? I've basically created context, and I've basically put them into to three buckets, right? There's technical capabilities where you need to understand. Now, I think there's a misconception around commanders that you have to know all things. You need to understand product security, application security, enterprise security, network security, all of these different aspects, right? No, that I actually fundamentally disagree with that because I think if you try to be an expert in all things, you become an expert in nothing. And what I would rather them be is generalists and understand that they can understand incident context depending on that, right? They understand what an insider threat investigation looks like compared to a hands-on keyboard attacker and the different dynamics compared to a product zero-day product vulnerability, right? Like those are the keys. But they have SMEs and experts that they're going to be working with that can provide the real nitty-gritty details. That's not why they exist. So they need that technical baseline knowledge to be able to understand that and to be able to operate and understand the terminology of what's being discussed, but they don't need to be experts in it. The other thing is behavioral, right? You need to have a certain constitution. You have to not get flustered. You need to be able to keep your composure. There's going to be people who are, especially in incidents, that are going to be very stressed. They're going to lash out potentially. They are going to be overwhelmed. You need to be calm, cool, and collected. You need to exert that. Even if you're not inside, I always tell this to my commanders. Yes, you could be like, I am way above my depth right now. I need help. But you need to preserve that for the rest because you could have 30 people on a call. And if they see the commander starting to lose it, it's going to kind of cascade from there. And the last thing is leadership qualities, right? This is, they're the real true things, right? Are you setting the right tone? Are you framing the conversation in the right way? Are you communicating the right way? You're not, you have to be able to be very clear in your language and have clarity, because if you start to get too complicated or it gets too hard to understand, especially executive audiences will get lost and you'll lose them and they lose confidence in you. And then, everything kind of falls apart from there. So I kind of look at those competencies levels of like technical baseline knowledge, the behavioral qualities, and then the leadership qualities are the other thing.
Leadership challenges.
Biggest thing that I see is that people don't put enough time in understanding their audience in those situations, right? Understanding who your CISO is, who your CTO is, the other key, VP plus personnel that are going to be the decision makers. Because if you go into that and you have no context on the type of information, how they like it presented to them, what are the most important things to them, you're going to get caught in the crossfire of them being like, asking questions, rapid fire, doing all those things, which again can put people very much in a stressful situation, because these are people who hold their jobs in their hands, that can make very big decisions, that can have an impact on your career. And I don't like to leave those things to chance, right? Like I don't like to leave it that I may, present something or not having, not to say that I'm not uncomfortable with saying I don't know and getting an answer, because you absolutely have to be comfortable with that. But you can do a lot of research and understanding, either talking to your peers or people who interact with these individuals, if you don't on yourself, to understand, well, how do they like their information? Do they like to go into the details, right? Because a CTO might be, who understands your platform, might want to go into the details on little things with an engineer, an IC, right? And that, that audience, hey, we need to have somebody on here who's going to be able to speak to the very technical details of what we're talking about, this fix or what's happening. But you may have a CISO who is much more high level, who wants to understand customer impact, understand, how it basically, what are the key items that we're doing from a large context, because he can speak to that. He doesn't have to work. He's not so much concerned about the smaller details. That is really important. Verbal cues and nonverbal cues on a bridge with leaders, especially, is really important. So I actually do a little trick with Zoom or with Teams, and I put their squares like right in my vision path, right? Because you can move them around, and I set it up because I watch them, because they'll tell me, right? If they're leaning in, right, that means like they're really interested and engaged, right? Or if they're touching their face or their hand, they're doing things like they're being frustrated. The conversation is is veering off, that they were losing the plot, right? And we need to bring it back in. These are really important things for a commander, because those are the type of things that a leader is going to get very frustrated by. Watching those verbal cues, you can get it before they have to do that. You can see the frustration. You can see that they really want to, when they're interested in something, they're looking at it, right? And being able to say, okay, let's let this conversation go a little bit further. They're interested. So all of those things kind of combine and allow that. And again, I always go back to context, right? That gives the commander the context on the audience and what they like to hear in the moment, what we should be continuing to follow up on, and what can give a little bit more air to, or if do we have to bring it back in, rein it back in the conversation and get us back on agenda, right? Don't go down those common pitfalls of, especially when you're dealing with very technical people, they can take you down rabbit holes that you don't need to go down to as a commander, because it's not helping the overall response. So those are the two things that I really, that understanding as much as you can before you walk into a war room with these people, about the context of who they are, how they like to do things. And then when you're on the call, understanding in the moment what they might need, and how you might need to steer the conversation.
Transforming chaos into a structure.
Getting onto that bridge and all of that chaos that's coming with it, all those people jumping on and bringing order out of that, is really one of the things that I emphasize to my commanders. And that's first and foremost, it's by exerting, your authority is the wrong way to say it. I don't want to think about it that it's not coming in and just start yelling at people. Like, that's not what it is. But it is coming in and framing the conversation and setting the tone. Right from the start, I'm here from Security Incident Command. My role is to handle this incident. We are going to be doing this, 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 and this, setting the agenda. It calms everybody down, right? It gets them into a framework where it's like, okay, he's got control, she's got control. There's a clear process that we're going to follow. An example of this is when I was at Twilio, when I was running crisis management there, and we had an incident with Lapsus Scattered Spider. And I remember this because there was a brand new CTO at the organization. He came from a much larger organization, and he had thoughts about incidents. But he was the CTO. His team was very much, engineering incident command, very much the engineering focus. But it was a security incident. I had to get on the call right when he was saying, well, we should bring in this team and bring in this team. And I had said, excuse me, sir, with all due respect, this is a security incident. My team is responsible for being in command of security incident. We are in charge here. We will set the agenda. We know what teams, what work streams we need. We will do it from there. And that was tough. Like that was something to a brand new CTO, very, very influential and very high up in the organization, to kind of set that tone to say, I understand, but no, we have a process. This is how it's going to go, and this is what we're going to do. And he respected that and understood. But once he understood that there was a process, that we were in charge, we were exerting that, and we had a plan, fell in line was that, provided guidance, asked questions, but less concerned about who's running it anymore. And there it started to work from there, and we established a good cadence and rolled through that incident. But I think it's an example of oftentimes commanders face that when they deal with leadership. They don't want to do that, but sometimes they need to do that because they need to show that they are capable of handling and meeting the situation. There's no one size fits all. I think one of the things I've noticed is that customers, obviously we're enterprise, right? So we're dealing with customers, 30,000 customers, but they're very used to the outage cadence, which is very much status page. Every 30 minutes you get an update saying, we're still investigating the incident, we've restored, still degraded, all those types of things. That doesn't apply to a security incident. Like we can't give that. If I did that every 30 minutes or something like that, one, it would be hard to understand the context of where we are. And I don't have a lot of information, right? Because I'm still trying to get all of that context. So we often we'll have people say, well, why aren't you providing updates every 4 hours? Well, okay, well, I could give you an update every 4 hours that says nothing to update, right? Because I don't have the operational context. I haven't understood the blast radius and what the potential impact is. I don't need a decision from you yet because I don't know what that decision might be yet. So we often do it case by case, and we'll say, hey, some are so fast moving with things developing. Yes, we might be sending out every 2 hours, right? Or every 6 hours. Or it might be that it's a slower moving thing. One of the examples of this is like if we have a 0-day vulnerability identified by a security researcher, there's no imminent, it's important. We're handling it with the highest urgency to get a patch out to our customers and protect them. But we are not necessarily having to update every 4 hours on it, because that's not, they're working on a fix. Maybe they're coming up with various hurdles, but it could be every day, or even if it's a longer term thing, every week we're checking in, right? So it's really context based and situation based. And I think falling into that, hey, we have to do it because we have to do it, doesn't help anybody, because I think it sets the wrong expectations that you're somehow going to have answers when answers don't exist. You need to frame the conversation as a commander, in the sense that when you get on and you're dealing with something like it, you have to say the knowns and the unknowns very clearly. And be very, very adamant about what you currently know, what is currently being investigated that you do not know, and also being clear what we don't know and may not know, right? Especially with telemetry and logging, right? We may not have had logging in place in a system, right? So we may have to say, we're going to have to say the worst case assumption here, right? So we have knowns, we know this, this, and this. We have these that we may be able to discover we're investigating right now. And we have these that are in the bucket of we may never know because we don't have the telemetry to be able to tell us this. And I think if you frame it in that way, it makes it easier for people to understand exactly what you can tell them and where they, especially decision makers, because you can say, look, we know that we have these logs that indicate that this person did this. They then moved into this environment that did theirs. We do not see we're trying to determine if there's exfiltration or there's other lateral movement into there. We're investigating these paths. We know we don't have logging because the logging wasn't being ingested into Splunk from these systems. So we're not going to be able to tell you what was actually taken or not. We maybe see that there was an exfiltration, but we can't give you A, B, and C was exfiltrated. right? And that's important from a legal perspective too, when you're thinking about reporting obligations and contractual obligations, right? So you have to be able to say that. And then it says, okay, now that leader can assume worst case scenario, we have to assume it's all gone, right? So now where do we go from worst case? And we have to, what could have been done with that and all those type of things. Because I do think that that helps a lot, because someone would say, well, that's still ambiguous. Well, no, it's not, because you're being very clear on what you know and do not know. And then there's someone has to make some choice with ambiguity. Yes, a lot of times that has to happen in IR, because you're not going to have 100% knowledge of everything. So you have to make choices based upon what's at your disposal right now. Um, so that is how I usually do it, by framing the conversation in that way. And then that also allows us to say, okay, let's put aside the known, because now we know it's known. Let's put aside the unknown and focus on the investigation. What's still not known? How can we get to that information? Who has that knowledge? What system has that knowledge? What logs? So, and then it also helps us orient the conversation very much around that specifically. And so you don't get into, again, rabbit holes and people going off and tangents. And, a lot of times I use things that are called mental razors. I don't know if you know what a mental razor, like
No,
Occam's razor, for example.
yes.
So they're yeah, mental shortcuts essentially, right? In all of these situations, like Occam's razor is, the simplest explanation is often the best explanation, right? Thinking about that, right? There's other ones with regard to that. So that's something I always keep in the back of my mind, because people will often go into these, worst case, elaborate APT is in your environment and all these things. And sometimes you have to say, okay, what's the simplest explanation here, right? Because it's often with the fewest assumptions, it usually is best. And there's other ones like Hanlon's razor is one I use often a lot. It's like never attribute to malice, which can be explained by neglect or ignorance. Or you're saying, well, this is a threat actor doing this. Well, could it also be that there was somebody who was negligent and left this, right? Left an S3 bucket exposed, or did something along those lines.
Mhm.
So, and the last one I love is Sagan's standard, which is like extraordinary evidence requires extraordinary claims requires extraordinary evidence. So if someone's going to tell you that we are being, ransomed by a threat actor like that, that's an extraordinary claim, right? Or extorted or things like that. That's likely that. Well, they need to have extraordinary evidence to support that claim.
Mhm.
And you have to make sure that they're bringing that to the table before you go and start raising alarm bells that we're dealing with a situation like that. So in those situations too, those type of things really help, because I think it grounds the conversation and it makes people say, not get down those rabbit holes that they can get to and hyperbolize and do a lot of those things if you're using those kind of mental shortcuts when you're on a call or when we're going through things with people.
What about cultural differences in the ecosystem?
Any organization that's global, especially, right? And we follow the sun model. So we're constantly switching off. And most of the operational teams we deal with are follow the sun as well. Some have more regions than others based upon, how they operate or less. One of the key things that I found is like, yes, there's cultural differences around the work times and like when you're working and when you're not working, right? There are certain things around. Certain cultures are more flexibility with their timing. Some are very, strict. I've come across, European culture, for example, is very much, especially some of the rules and regulations that have been instituted there, as well as Australia, for example, as well too, where it's like, hey, when people are done with the workday, unless they're in specific roles and have specific things, like there's not an expectation that they're dealing with something, right? That has caused issues, especially from a security response perspective, because it also makes it harder for us, especially when we're trying to get a hold of customers and get them to do something or act upon things. There's that cultural differences where we may not be able to get a hold of somebody or may not be able to do something. And I think if you go into understanding, that comes back to like, you have to understand when you're dealing with a customer that has those different parameters. Okay, it may be difficult for us to do this. We may need to escalate up to a higher level automatically, because we can't do the normal escalation path of this admin to this person to this person to that all the way up. We may need to go up higher if it's that big of an incident that we have to get them responded because of those constraints that we're facing. So oftentimes that will lead us to escalate higher and quicker, because then that person can cascade it down and make sure that the right people are responding and doing certain things. So that kind of balance between, work-life balances, I know that's a horrible kind of framing for it, but that balance in different cultures and understanding of it But there's also the other aspect of this. When you have a global team, you also have to be very cognizant of burnout, right? And culturally, like some people will be willing to continue working until unless you force them to stop, especially in major security incidents, right? Because people don't want to feel like they're letting someone down. So someone may start working on something in the US and they're staying up till 1, 2, 3 in the morning. And you have to be able to say, no, you got to get off. This is not going to be over today. This is not going to be over tomorrow. This is going to be weeks we're dealing with here. We have to be at a good operational cadence where it's strong, where you need to do 8 to 10 maybe hours and then cut off, and we'll transfer it over to the next region because you can't sustain this. You may think you can sustain it, but you can't. Nobody can, right? Certain people maybe have higher tolerance periods where they can do it for longer than others, but nobody can do that. And I think that's hard culturally because certain people are very, it depends on, just personality wise as well, like ownership, like this is mine. I want to handle this. I don't want to give it off. You have to be able to step in there and say, no, you need to hand this off to somebody. You can't do this by yourself. And if it's one person is the only person who can do that, that's an organizational failure. That's a systemic issue, right? If we that one person can't hand it off because there's nobody to hand it off to, that's something we have to deal with as an organization to say, and that's mostly in the post-incident review and the lessons learned. It can't be that one person is the only person who has the institutional knowledge and understanding and has to work nonstop around the clock for us to get there. So dealing with those like personality conflicts and cultural differences around, that nonstop and being able to stop and say, no, you need to step away. You need to do this. We will handle it. We'll take it from there and we'll transfer it are really important. So those are kind of two different sides of the same coin, right? In the sense of certain people where you need to navigate that they may not be available, and other people who want to work too much and stay too involved, and kind of those interpersonal dynamics.
How do you ensure your tools continue to operate during a major incident?
I have a background that's in business continuity as well, and I think resiliency and this is a huge thing for business continuity and resiliency planning is that you need to understand those critical systems. And IDP is a critical system, right? That if you're using single sign-on as your way to get in, you need to have that clearly outlined in your business continuity plan. Okay, if there is a compromise or if that, Okta goes down and we cannot sign into our environment through single sign-on, what are our options? Break glass options are great, right? Having an ability to, get into your environment and having break glass options. The thing I will say about that, though, is imperative to have that. And every system is going to be different. But having strict protocols around those break glass options. We have seen that a lot of times people just rely upon, single factor authentication or, basic authentication as their break glass options. And they'll often just have that and they'll, if they can't use their IDP, they'll go back to that and they'll be able to log in using, a variety of means using bacon. The problem with that is what we're seeing in the industry right now is the proliferation of info stealing malware and a lot of these, hitting browsers and things like that. So if you're not protecting that information in a way that is going to make sure that that doesn't get compromised, you have that, someone downloads that or has that there because they want it in their back pocket on their local, machine, and that gets compromised. You've now just given, an open door to a threat actor to get into your environment, and that you're, going to have minimal ways of detecting as well because it's a valid login, right? And it's going to look normal, and there's not going to be any anomalous behavior there to log in, and then potentially lateral movement and pivoting depending on the privileges of that person, especially if it's somebody who has higher privileges, right? And could do a lot more once they get into your environment. So I think it's imperative that you do have these things, but it has to be very strict. It can't be laissez-faire in the sense of, yes, we have break glass. A bunch of people can go into our internal wiki and find our break glass options, which I say that because I know that happens because people want to have it easily accessible, right? And be able to do that without having to jump through hoops. But you have to have it through a password manager. You need to have other protocols in place. Maybe it's only, it's in, that only certain people have access to and can break glass that, because I think you need to have it, but you need to have those strict controls around it so that it's only used when it's absolutely needed. and make sure that there was never any potential compromise of those credentials before they were being utilized. But it is a problem, the last thing I would say is too is that out-of-band communications and IR plans are imperative. You need to assume that at a certain point from ransomware or just having a ATP and APT, excuse me, in your environment, that you may have to get out of your own system and be running your entire IR process through an alternative system. So having your basic IR plans and all your key personnel in a completely air gap system that you can operate out of and make sure you have that continuity, as well as a communications plan and all those aspects set up is imperative as well, because there will come a time for most organizations where they don't trust what they're saying in their team's channels or what they're saying in email, and they have to move off to be able to conduct the investigation the proper way. So that's also imperative, not only just the break glass options to get into your environment, but to also say, we need to operate fully outside of our own environment.
Do you see AI as an enabler?
I found with AI from a commander's perspective is that, and from a lot of different ways, you have to know what you want AI to solve before you start using it in an operational context. So what are you trying to solve? The way we're using AI right now internally is to solve a lot of the things that are taking the time away from our commanders to do the jobs that we've been talking about here, right? The coordination, the facilitation of the bridges, the skill sets that are very human oriented, right? The AI that we're using is to take away the manual process, right? To allow us to get context faster on an incident. So using AI or MCP servers internally to be able to give us operational context, to be able to say, okay, what's the impact? What are we seeing? Okay, who are the owners of these specific systems? All of that stuff that's going to be imperative for us getting to mitigation faster. That's how we're leveraging AI. Mm-hmm. How is it helping us then, draft communications and, come up with it quickly based upon that context and draft it. And then we have a human in the loop to review it and make sure that it's meeting all those things. We're also, playing around with how we can make certain things more self-service, right? If you have AI, how do you make agents or, bots in that sense, be able to provide certain levels of information to people that, a CISO or whoever it might be that's asking you questions constantly during an incident? Hey, maybe we can create something where it's taking all the information that we're tracking it in our system. We use actually a ServiceNow tool called Major Security Incident Module, which is in a part of our SecOps product to do major security incidents. So, how are we using that? And then, being able to use an MCP and AI to be able to then, extract the information that we're housing in there to be able to give an output to a leader around, okay, what's the current status of this? Okay, based upon their persona as well, right? Like, hey, CISO likes to know about this, this, and this. A CTO likes to know about this, this, and this. A sales or leader likes to know about this, and being able to do that. So we're thinking about ways that we can take those things that are really pulling us away from the main part of our job, which is to coordinate and facilitate to getting to mitigation and into full remediation for an incident, and having all those other things that tend to take up a lot of our time, right? And to focus on that by using AI to do that. And I think it is a game changer in that sense, because it does make getting to context, getting people connected, getting information faster and more at your fingertips, that traditionally you'd have to wait till someone would tell you something, or you'd have to go into a system, or maybe you create a ticket, then someone responds into a ticket or things like that, where it's, if you have an MCP connecting to all these different things, you might be able to say, okay, there's already an INT, a network security has already created an incident on this, and they're blocking the IPs, right? I would like to see it almost as a co-pilot or companion to a commander, right? We're often dealing with, we have playbooks, we have run books, we have all these things, but opening up a playbook in the middle of an incident is a hard thing to do, right? Or checklist is fine, but it's hard to do there and then dive in there. What it'd be nice to do is having an AI be a companion to be able to look at it, right? And be able to say, okay, in similar incidents, when we've dealt with a hands-on keyboard attacker, we've engaged these teams. I see that you don't have this team on the call. We should get them on the call. I see that, we did an evaluation of this system when we had a similar type of vulnerability in the past. We should evaluate that system. I don't see it as a work stream right now. Those are the things that I think are going to be really a force multiplier for incident commanders in the future from AI, because especially for those that don't have dedicated teams like me, where you're putting on the incident commander hat occasionally or for extended period of time, you can have a companion that be able to do that and provide that, because, and it has to be very contextual to your organization as well, because not every organization is the same. So it has to be an AI that can understand all the data, the prior incidents, all of that knowledge that you have internally, and use that to be that companion. So that's some of the things that we're thinking about, and how we potentially could use that, and how it could it help us internally, because I think that is a game changer for incident commanders, is to have that, yeah, again, that companion, that co-pilot that's always kind of keeping an eye on things and reminding you of things and keeping tracks of stuff that could potentially fall through the cracks. Everyone is jumping in head first, right? In the sense of like, we're going to use it for everything, just everywhere, all at once. But what I think we're seeing a lot of times is now that people, and you're seeing some articles come out about this, especially with like the cost of rising of AI, so rising, as well as like the productivity gains. I think I saw Uber's COO and a couple other, different leaders kind of saying, hey, we're going to reduce ours because we're not seeing the gains. And I think that is primarily what you're talking about here, is very much like, okay, we're using it, but are we using it efficiently and intentionally to actually solve a problem? Are we just throwing this as another tool at a problem, like you did with any other kind of software, any kind of tool before that, right? We all know you can have 5 different SIEM tools at your disposal, but that's not going to help you do anything better, right? You need one efficient one that works within your workflows, that makes your specific to your organization and how it operates bettered. This is the same thing with AI. I think that's, people are often not thinking intentionally enough around what my problem is, what are the workflows around it, and then saying, okay, where can I insert AI to make this workflow better? And where is it actually more conducive to have a human do certain things, right? Because we are seeing that there's an over-reliance upon AI in a lot of respects, that people will we'll just throw it in Claude, we'll just throw it in OpenAI, right? Like, and that, I see this from an IR perspective, is that I think it can be a detriment to people, because they're going to lose a lot of that institutional knowledge and context and skill sets, because they're throwing it to Claude to do. But there are appropriate things to help with that, right? Yes, use it for these purposes, but you still need to understand the nuances of various things and understand the systems and how they operate and why they do that. And then, because if you don't have that, what you're doing is you're creating inefficiencies just in different places. When Mythos came out, and then, the subsequent, OpenAI with their own products, similar to products coming out. And again, just not just those, but like LLM based, right? The ability to identify vulnerabilities, especially, and what that presents as a challenge from a prioritization standpoint, because typically through bug bounty or through other means, you have time, 90, most disclosures are 90 days, right? The researcher will give you 90 days to fix a bug, and then they will publicly disclose it if they're responsible, right? If they're not, that's a different story. What I think this is doing is this is changing fundamentally our prioritization. We have to treat this more like a mass casualty incident. My prior background, where I worked in physical security and emergency management, very much we always were worried about these situations where you had a terror attack and you had something like that, and you had a mass casualty incident. And you really have to triage like that type of incident when we're dealing with that. If a threat actor gets a hold of Mythos and is able to run it on ServiceNow or any other company and identify all these bugs, or we just get a flood of these being given to us, right? That says, hey, you have to fix these. And our customers are saying, you need to fix this now, fast. We have to triage that. You have to change your prioritization, right? It has to be, okay, which ones are, are affecting internet facing systems? Which ones are customer impacting? Which ones are corporate? Like all of these type of things, we have to start to create those criteria now about, yes, what are our crown jewels? What are we saying, if anything is a vulnerability against this system or this database or whatever it might be, that's going to be top of the list. Very similar to that mass casualty, that MASH hospital in the front lines of a comment, say, hey, this is one that we can know we can stop quickly and do it. Let's do this one. This one's going to take longer time. We can do this mitigation in place to help us, right? We can put IP restrictions or whatever it is, right? Like we have mitigation capabilities. And one of the things that we are, definitely thinking about is making sure we inventory all those mitigation capabilities. It's basically like, hey, understanding like a hospital, all the different capabilities you have. I've been watching the Pit, which is a new show around like hospital triage, and they do that in the emergency room, right? It's like they have a list of all the different type of techniques that they can use in different situations. We have to have that too. We have to say, hey, if it's related to this, we can use this technology or this system, and this is how we could mitigate it, or at least reduce the attack surface down. So we have to start to inventory all those things. And then we have to also internally start to realize what are our priorities as a company, right? And then we have those in our back pocket so that when we face it, we can start to do it. And it's all agreed upon from the beginning. That's the key. You can't, if you're doing this in the moment without that prior aspect, you're going to have people who are going to have conflicting priorities, right? A product team is going to have a different priority than an engineering team, than a IT team, and all these different things, right? Because their vision is tunneled to, I care about corporate systems in IT. I care about the product itself and product and engineering, right? We need to establish this before so that we all agree if we have, vulnerability is targeting these systems, they will be prioritized over, these, which ones are SOC system, financial, all that type of stuff, right? That we have to do from a compliance standpoint. We also have federal customers in the United States and other parts of the in government cloud, right? So those type of things. We have to get that all laid out, and so that we have that prioritization matrix available to us so that we can look at it and do it. Because otherwise, it's really you don't want to be in a situation where you're creating this all on the fly and ad hoc, and potentially you let some very impactful bug get through and it's exploited, and you're dealing with a much larger incident that has much far-reaching consequences for you and your organization and your customers.
Let's wrap it up. Thank you very much, Timothy, for participating in this episode. It was really insightful. You brought a lot of interesting perspectives and subjects that are also dear to me, but brought up some new ones as well. So thank you very much for spending the time. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
The Incident Commander series are brought to you by Coon Backers.
Let's wrap it up.